Latin American photography that Pedro Meyer started with Pablo Gasparini and many other Latin American photographers and activists. So it's good to be discovered by London, but we've discovered ourselves decades ago. This means that always a discovery seen from the point of view of the discoverer, of the explorer, of the Amazon that you mentioned, is maybe welcome or eaten. In Brazil we would say that we eat them, we throw away what we don't want of them, and we use what we like. So it's a different way of being a center, eating the European, taking what you like from it and expelling the rest. It's a Latin American way. So we have our own pride and our own networking. The Latin American colloquiums evolved into events in Venezuela, Cuba, and now in Brazil we've had the 3 Foro Latinoamericano de Fotografía de São Paulo, organized by Estudio Madalena, Yatacana Brava, myself and many other activists of photography in the region. And as a consequence of the first Foro Latinoamericano de Fotografía de São Paulo, supported by a local bank, Itaú Bank, it's not a British bank, but it can support a forum. We've had the initiative there to produce, research, and deliver the first heavy work about Latin American photography books, which was curated by Horacio Fernandez, a curator of photography in the Reina Sofia, and who invented, in a way, this concept of photography book as an art piece with his book Fotografía Pública in '99. And the second book he made was this Latin American photography book, where many important photographic figures emerged as significant in the history of photography at large, not certainly of Latin American photography only, as Claudia Andujar, Paolo Gasparini, and many other artists. Therefore, if London recognizes Latin American photography, certainly will come, but we can do our own work as well. Of course, we have our own networking that includes certainly Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Chile, and so on. That's moving on, and that won't stop. So we consider ourselves a center as well, a center of our own visual production and our own visual culture. And the political aspect of our work is not something meditated as a tool to be a trendy artist, but it's part of our daily life. We have to be political because otherwise we cannot survive. What you say that when you are in Venezuela or in Israel, this political thing, it's appalling, and okay, we live like that. Therefore, thank you for having the chance of having a Latin American photography present here.
Politics, religion, and football.
Therefore, just wanted to say that Latin American photography has a speed and a network of its own, and it is projected elsewhere as any other photography, and can dialogue in an equal position with any other, let's say, cultural landscape, as certainly you mentioned with Enfoco and all the New Yorker production of Latino photography with the museum, where we had the Disappeared show a few years ago, which was certainly very important for Latin American photography in New York.
So let's see if there's any questions coming out of all that now in the audience. Anyone want to say anything else? Any questions? Jane, you've been very involved in some of these. This is Jane England, who has the England & Co Gallery in London. Something. Oh, sorry. I haven't got a really very specific question, but from the Latin American artists I've been working with, I've become interested in almost the 2 strains of photography from Latin America. One is the photography that perhaps has an aesthetic and is linked with place, and then there's the photography that really emerges from politics and from protest and a sort of quiet subversion. I work with the artist Cecilia Vicuña, who I've known since the 1970s when we were both involved with Artists for Democracy. And we re-met some years ago, and we've been working together for the last few years. And Cecilia is not a photographer per se, and she would not claim to be. In fact, she hardly knows how to use a camera. In a way, she's a vicarious photographer, and she's used photography in that she's made a performance, and it's always documented. And to her, it doesn't matter who holds the camera. She frames it, she designs what it is. So in a way, she's using photography, and the photography is an important component of her work, whether it's about her early sex, sort of almost sexual performances from the 1970s, to the more political works like Vaso de Leche, which she made when she was associated with Carter, in exile when she was in Bogota. And then you have the photography that emerges in the museum's document gallery. There's a lot of photography that had to be quietly subversive. And we had a portfolio some time ago from the group of 7. And I mean, a lot of the people in those photographs were disappeared. And a lot of the original negatives and the photographs were destroyed because they could be used as evidence when people were being persecuted. So I think there is a sort of dark underside of the photography that's emerged from Latin America, and I think that's actually very important. And I think there's a lot of very heroic photographers from Latin America. And I'm just on a learning curve, it's still at the beginning to me. But I think there are two distinct veins. There's the kind of political photography, there's the photography just being used almost as a tool for conceptual political artists and performance artists. And then you have what I think is a great aesthetic from Latin America. And I think there's wonderful photography from Brazil, which in a sense links with abstraction and has a kind of very much a link with the avant-garde of Europe. And then you have another almost more mystical and more imbued with place photography. So I'm very intrigued by the whole subject, and I'm still at the beginning of learning. I went to Latin America first in 1974 and traveled around, took my own photographs, because I'm also a photographer, it's another private hack. And so I've always been interested, and I studied with some Latin American photographers who were here in London in the 70s. So I'm interested, but I don't have a wide knowledge. It's something I'm still absorbing. These are the sort of strains that I've sort of identified. And at the moment, I'm very interested in the sort of political photography that involves politics and emerges from protest and a sort of underground movement.
Jane, can you tell us about the photograph section you had in Pinta last year about the photographs from Chile during the Allende period?
Well, it wasn't so much that I had photographs from Chile. I was mainly showing work that related to, we had some photographs by Cecilia Vicuña, but they weren't actually taken by her. They were documents of her performances, but they were actually not made in Chile, the ones we showed, because she was in London when Allende fell, and she was not able to return to Chile for over a decade. So the photographs were actually taken in Bogota. Some of the other photographs were shown were actually taken in London. They were photographs relating to Sigma's gallery. So a lot of the things we showed that year were documentary photographs more than photography per se.
Anyone like to respond?
I'd just like to chip in there and say Horacio's book of the Latin American photo books, it brings a really interesting insight, because a lot of those photo books during those times, they weren't created as art photography. They weren't created as they were the original political stance. The photography was used for political purposes in different ways. And recognizing, or having this book that recognizes a lot of practices that weren't originally artistic, that are now in this way engulfed by the art world, shown at art fairs, published as compilations of photo books, is a very interesting thing that I've noticed, and it's very particular that you should mention it, because it's brought up all of these practices back to the surface. I worked last year. I don't know if you seen it. It's a beautiful exhibition at the Fondation Cartier in Paris called Latin America Photography. But basically, they They made a highlight on the 60s and 70s. All of these practices that weren't especially photographic, but photography kind of what was the best way, or was the preferred way by a series of sometimes artists, but sometimes they were political activists, sometimes they were writers, sometimes there were other things, to just build into this now works that are very coveted by collectors, by publishers, by book collectors, by museums, so it's a very interesting point that Jane just flagged up.
I'd like to ask about the research, because we are talking a lot of photography from the 60s and 70s, but political issues in Latin America with the anarchists, socialism, or the vanguardists that were represented in many magazines, books, photo clubs from the 1910s, the 20s, the 30s, and all these connections also with the magazines from Puerto Rico, universities from Buenos Aires, from Havana, from Chile, from Sao Paulo, that were recalling all these networks from the 20s, 30s, also with the ultraism and all the systems in Spain. That is a whole world that also is antecedent with very lot of struggles with political issues that also, well, we've grown and all the antecedent what happened in the 70s. What is all, what is regarding all that and the research from the arts, from photography from the 10s, 20s, 30s and 40s. I know Coppola is the issue regarding, but it's a lot in Latin America and a lot of network functioning that time too.
Yeah, definitely. Whatever you've just brought up is really important. And I think when you refer to photo clubs, that's a really important point, because there was so many different, what we used to be called amateur photo clubs, but now we actually consider them that they were working artists or working photographers at the time. And when I was in Brazil, I visited Gaspar Gasparian's son, and in his studio he had many, many booklets of these photo clubs. And I mean, I'd never seen them before. There must be hundreds of them out there.
My dad was the editor of that.
Yes,
photo club.
yes. So, I mean, yes, there is a lot of research to be done on this.
Fotocine Clube Bandeiranti. Yeah.
Well, the photo book research of Latin America was the first research ever made on this field. Therefore, we discovered a lot of work, but we just opened a field of research that cannot be performed with one book.
Pandora's books.
There will be more books. There are many books being done about Brazilian, Mexican, specialized research. But the photo club movement in Brazil has a show that Itaú Bank bought with a number of key figures. There's something published already, and the collection. There is some research being done on that, yes.
What was really interesting was that the things that I saw weren't just about Brazil or what was happening in Brazil. They were exhibitions happening all over Latin America, but also internationally. And these really small publications that just, the photographers would send away their prints, and there would be an exhibition, and then they would get a copy of the booklet, similar to this, you know? They would get it sent back to them. So there was all these really funny connections, like Thomas Farkas and Edward Weston having correspondence with each other in the 40s and 50s that you would never expect. So there's lots of research to be done still.
One of my fascinations has always been, whether I was a musician or a photographer or wanted to be a scientist, I was winning all the science fairs. My issues were, in school, in New York City, how come I never learned anything about my own culture? So I was also, from very little, addressing omissions in history. So I was a bit of a researcher. Now, at this point in my life, I've met Pablo Delano, who became one of the WPA photographers, during the 30s, and people like, I forgot his name now, but these, the Dust Bowl photographers, Dorothea Lange, and so then there was a Puerto Rican Russian who was attached to that, who created a major work, right? And then it happens in so many other fields. Charlie Biasini, the founder of Enfoco, he's in Lord Cecil Beaton's book because he was his assistant during the 70s, and he was hanging out with Georgia O'Keeffe. So then I'm looking for heroes. I'm looking for, besides all the musical heroes, these heroes in the art world and these heroes in the photo world. And basically what I was doing was documenting, keeping a diary, and within that, I discovered all these gaps that are now quite factual and should be addressed historically, because it's all there, actually, you know. So Rafael Ferrer is also in a sculptor and a painter as well. And he is the son of José Ferrer, the actor, okay, who was the best Cyrano de Bergerac of all times.
I think what we could do, have you any more questions to discuss here? We could go into the exhibition and then go around, because there are enough of the artists to talk about it, and it's quite interesting to find out what you all think about it.
Well,
Any more questions?
Thank you. The fact that the photographers have stepped into the table without previous notice. That is something flexible, very London. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Hey? What?
Very photographers.
Very photographers. Thanks very much. Let's move on. Should we move to the Pinta Photo?
Thank you, Sue, for the invitation. Thank you for the panelists as well.
Thanks for all coming.
Thank you.
We haven't stopped yet. Come on, let's go.
Let's go and do our thing.